A successful businessman walks into a newly opened cafe, but when he notices the ring on the young employee's finger, he feels his blood run cold. This relic from the past reappears, setting off a chain of events that will shake the very foundation of his carefully built life. The crisp autumn air nipped at Thomas Miller's face as he stepped out of his sleek, black Mercedes-Benz S-Class onto the bustling sidewalk of Maple Avenue in downtown Denver. At 45, Thomas cut an impressive figure in his tailored charcoal suit, his salt and pepper hair carefully styled to project an image of success and confidence. As the owner of Miller Construction, one of Denver's largest and most prestigious building firms, Thomas had grown accustomed to the finer things in life. Yet, as he stood before the rustic facade of Memory Aroma, a newly opened coffee shop that had been generating buzz among the local foodies, Thomas felt an inexplicable flutter in his chest. He'd driven past this place dozens of times in recent weeks, always intending to stop in but never finding the right moment. Today, something had compelled him to take a detour from his usual morning routine. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, Thomas was immediately enveloped by the rich, comforting aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans. The interior of Memory Aroma was a masterful blend of modern industrial chic and cozy warmth. Exposed brick walls were adorned with local artwork, while Edison bulbs hung from the ceiling, casting a soft amber glow over the space. Mismatched vintage furniture created intimate seating areas, and the gentle hum of conversation mingled with the rhythmic whir of coffee grinders. As Thomas approached the counter, his eyes were drawn to the young barista behind it. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with a mess of curly brown hair pulled back into a loose ponytail and warm hazel eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. Her name tag read Jasmine. "Good morning, welcome to Memory Aroma." Jasmine greeted him cheerfully. "What can I get for you today?" Thomas found himself momentarily distracted by her infectious smile. "Good morning," he replied, quickly scanning the artisanal menu board above her head. "I'll have a double espresso, please." As Jasmine nodded and turned to the gleaming espresso machine, Thomas's gaze was inadvertently drawn to her hands. That's when he saw it. A delicate silver ring adorned with a small emerald on her right ring finger. The world around him seemed to fade away as he stared at the familiar piece of jewelry, his mind reeling with a flood of memories. "Sir, your espresso is ready." Jasmine's voice broke through his reverie. Thomas blinked, realizing he'd been lost in thought for several moments. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, reaching for his wallet. That's a beautiful ring you're wearing." Jasmine's face lit up. "Oh, thank you, it was a gift from my mom. She said it was special to her when she was younger." She handed him the espresso, her fingers briefly brushing against his as she did so. Thomas felt as though he'd been struck by lightning. The touch, the ring, the girl's features that now seemed hauntingly familiar. It was all too much. He managed to pay for his coffee and make his way to a small table by the window, his mind racing with possibilities and long-buried emotions. As he sipped his espresso, Thomas found himself transported back in time to a crisp autumn day, much like this one. Over 2 decades ago in Chicago, Thomas had been a junior at Northwestern University, studying civil engineering with dreams of building skyscrapers that would shape city skylines. He was walking across the quad, arms laden with textbooks, when he quite literally ran into Laura Carter. Books went flying, papers scattered in the wind, and 2 young lives collided in a moment that would change everything. Laura had been a vision. Long chestnut hair, bright green eyes that sparkled with intelligence and humor, and a laugh that made Thomas's heart skip a beat. She was studying literature, with aspirations of becoming a teacher. They'd spent that entire afternoon retrieving scattered notes and talking, missing their respective classes, and not caring one bit. From that day forward, Thomas and Laura had been inseparable. Their relationship blossomed quickly, fueled by shared dreams, passionate debates, and a love that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. They complemented each other perfectly. Thomas's practical nature balancing Laura's creative spirit, her boundless optimism tempering his occasional cynicism. It was on their first anniversary that Thomas had given Laura the ring, a delicate silver band with a small emerald that had once belonged to his grandmother. He'd saved for months to have it resized and polished, wanting it to be perfect. When he presented it to her on a moonlit walk along Lake Michigan, Laura's eyes had filled with tears of joy. "It's beautiful, Thomas," she'd whispered, slipping it onto her finger. I'll cherish it forever." For 3 blissful years, Thomas and Laura's love had seemed unshakable. They'd talked of marriage, of the life they'd build together after graduation, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. In the spring of their senior year, Thomas received an offer he couldn't refuse, a prestigious internship with a top architectural firm in New York City. It was a dream come true, a foot in the door of the industry he'd always aspired to conquer. Laura had been supportive, encouraging him to take the opportunity even as sadness shadowed her eyes. "We'll make it work," she'd assured him, her fingers intertwined with his. "This is your chance, Thomas. We can handle a little distance." But distance, as they would learn, was far from little. The demands of Thomas's internship and the pressures of starting his career consumed him. Phone calls became less frequent, visits were postponed, and slowly, painfully, the distance between them grew to be more than just physical. The last time Thomas heard Laura's voice was on a rainy night in October, nearly 6 months after he'd moved to New York. She'd called, her voice tight with an emotion he couldn't quite place, saying they needed to talk, that she had something important to tell him. "Can it wait?" he'd asked, distracted by a looming project deadline. "I'm swamped right now, but I'll call you this weekend, I promise." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Sure," Laura had finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This weekend." But the weekend came and went, and Thomas, buried under a mountain of work and ambition, forgot to call. When he finally remembered, weeks later, his calls went straight to voicemail. Emails went unanswered. It was as if Laura had vanished into thin air. Back in the present, Thomas stared out the window of memory aroma, his coffee long since gone cold. The weight of missed opportunities and unspoken words pressed heavily on his chest. Could it be possible? The timing, the ring, the girl's features that seemed to be a perfect blend of his own and Laura's, it all pointed to a truth that Thomas wasn't sure he was ready to face. He found his gaze drawn back to Jasmine, who was laughing with a customer at the counter. Her smile, so achingly familiar, sent another pang through his heart. How had he not seen it before? The shape of her eyes, the curve of her cheek, they were echoes of the woman he'd once loved so deeply. Thomas felt a maelstrom of emotions threatening to overwhelm him. Guilt for the way things had ended with Laura, regret for the years of silence that followed, and a growing sense of panic at the realization that he might have missed out on so much more than just a lost love. As he watched Jasmine move gracefully behind the counter, Thomas was struck by an overwhelming urge to know the truth. But how could he even begin to unravel this mystery? He couldn't very well walk up to the girl and demand answers. And Laura, where was she now? Did she live in Denver too? Had she been here all this time, raising their daughter just miles away from where he'd built his empire? The questions swirled in Thomas's mind, each one giving rise to a dozen more. He knew he couldn't walk away from this. Couldn't pretend he hadn't seen what he'd seen. The successful, confident businessman was suddenly adrift, faced with a past he'd thought long buried and a future he'd never imagined. As Thomas finally stood to leave, his legs unsteady beneath him, he cast one last glance at Jasmine. She caught his eye and gave him a friendly wave, oblivious to the turmoil she'd unknowingly unleashed. Thomas managed a weak smile in return before stepping out into the autumn air, the bell above the door chiming a cheerful farewell that felt jarringly out of sync with his tumultuous emotions. Walking back to his car, Thomas knew his life had irrevocably changed. The carefully constructed world he'd built for himself over the past 2 decades suddenly felt hollow, built on a foundation of missed connections and unresolved regrets. As he slid behind the wheel of his luxury sedan, Thomas made a decision. He would find out the truth, whatever it took. He owed it to Laura, to Jasmine, and to the young man he'd once been, the one who'd promised to love Laura forever. The engine purred to life, and Thomas pulled away from the curb, leaving memory aroma behind. But the memories it had stirred and the questions it had raised would follow him long after the scent of coffee had faded. A new chapter was beginning, one that promised to be filled with revelations, reconciliations, and perhaps, if he was lucky, a chance at redemption. The following days passed in a blur for Thomas Miller. He went through the motions of his daily routine, meetings, phone calls, site visits, but his mind constantly drifted back to the young barista, with the hauntingly familiar smile and the ring that had opened a floodgate of memories and questions. On Wednesday morning, Thomas found himself sitting in his spacious corner office on the 30th floor of a gleaming skyscraper in downtown Denver. The view of the Rocky Mountains in the distance usually filled him with a sense of accomplishment, a reminder of how far he'd come from the ambitious young man who'd left Chicago with nothing but dreams and determination. Today, however, the majestic peaks seemed to mock him, a testament to all he'd gained professionally and all he might have lost personally. A gentle knock on the door broke through his reverie. "Mr. Miller?" His assistant, Sarah, poked her head in. "Your 10 o'clock is here." Thomas nodded, straightening his tie as he stood. "Send him in, please." Moments later, a man in his late 50s entered the office. Carl Davidson had the weathered look of someone who'd seen it all and then some. His salt and pepper hair was cropped short, and his brown eyes held a sharp intelligence that had served him well in his decades as a private investigator. "Mr. Miller," Carl greeted, shaking Thomas's hand firmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Likewise, Mr. Davidson, please have a seat." Thomas gestured to the leather chairs in front of his desk. As they sat, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of anxiety. Was he really going to do this? Hire a stranger to dig into his past, into Laura's life? Carl seemed to sense his hesitation. "Mr. Miller, in my line of work, I've learned that people only hire a private investigator when they're looking for answers they can't find on their own. Whatever you tell me stays between us." Thomas took a deep breath, then began to speak. He told Carl about Laura, about their relationship in college, and about how they'd lost touch. He described his encounter at Memory Aroma and his suspicions about Jasmine. As he spoke, Thomas was surprised by the emotion in his own voice. The raw pain of old wounds reopened. Carl listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. When Thomas finished, the investigator leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "It's not much to go on," he said honestly, "but I've worked with less. What exactly do you want to know, Mr. Miller?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration and uncertainty. "Everything," he said finally. "I need to know if Jasmine is my daughter. I need to know where Laura has been all these years, what happened after we lost touch, and I need to know why she never told me." Carl nodded, his expression softening slightly. "I'll do my best, Mr. Miller. These things can take time, especially if they've been trying to keep a low profile. Are you prepared for what I might find?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Was he prepared? Thomas wasn't sure, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. "I have to know," he said simply. As Carl left with a promise to begin his investigation immediately, Thomas turned to look out the window once more. The mountain stood silent and immovable, much like the walls he'd built around his heart over the years. Now those walls were beginning to crumble, and Thomas wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay beyond them. The next week passed in a haze of anticipation and dread for Thomas. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, as if the constant activity could drown out the questions swirling in his mind. His employees noticed the change in their usually composed boss, exchanging worried glances when he snapped at minor mistakes or zoned out during important meetings. Mark Johnson, Thomas's right-hand man and head of operations, finally worked up the courage to approach him after a particularly tense meeting with investors. "Thomas," he said, closing the conference room door behind him, "is everything all right? You seem distracted lately." Thomas sighed, slumping into a chair. He and Mark had worked together for over a decade, building Miller Construction from a small local outfit to the powerhouse it was today. If anyone had earned the right to ask such a question, it was Mark. "I'm fine," Thomas started to say, then stopped himself. The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. "Actually, no. I'm not fine. But it's personal, Mark. I don't want to burden you with it." Mark sat down across from him, his face etched with concern. "Thomas, we've been through hell and high water together building this company. Whatever's going on, you don't have to face it alone." For a moment, Thomas was tempted to confide in his friend. But how could he explain something he barely understood himself? How could he put into words the possibility that he might have a daughter he never knew about? That the woman he'd once loved more than anything might have kept such a monumental secret from him? "I appreciate that, Mark," Thomas said finally. "Really, I do. But this is something I need to figure out on my own. I promise. It won't affect the company." Mark looked skeptical but nodded. "All right, but if you need anything, and I mean anything, you know where to find me." As Mark left, Thomas felt a pang of guilt. He was lucky to have such loyal friends, people who'd stood by him as he climbed the ladder of success. Yet here he was, keeping them at arm's length when he needed support more than ever. It was nearly 2 weeks after his initial meeting with Carl Davidson that Thomas received the call he'd been both dreading and anticipating. "Mr. Miller?" Carl's gruff voice came over the line. "I think you'll want to hear what I've found. Can you meet me at my office this afternoon?" Thomas's heart raced as he agreed, barely registering the rest of the conversation. As soon as he hung up, he called Sarah to clear his schedule for the rest of the day. Whatever Carl had discovered, Thomas knew it would change everything. Carl's office was a far cry from the sleek modernity of Miller Construction's headquarters. Located in an aging brick building in one of Denver's older neighborhoods, it had the cluttered, lived-in feel of a place where real work got done. Faded diplomas and licenses hung on the walls, competing for space with filing cabinets and bookshelves overflowing with legal tomes and true crime novels. As Thomas settled into a worn leather chair across from Carl's desk, he felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. "What did you find?" he asked, not bothering with pleasantries. Carl pulled out a thick file folder and placed it on the desk between them. "Mr. Miller, I want you to prepare yourself. What I'm about to tell you, well, it's going to be a lot to process." Thomas nodded, his mouth dry. "Just tell me." Carl opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. "Laura Carter," he began, "moved to Denver shortly after you two lost contact. She never married, and she's been working as an English teacher at East High School for the past 20 years. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. Laura had been here, in Denver, all this time. How had their paths never crossed? "And Jasmine?" he managed to ask. Carl's expression softened. Jasmine Rose Carter was born on June 15, 2001, at Denver Health Medical Center. Her birth certificate, he paused, meeting Thomas's eyes, lists the father as unknown. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Thomas gripped the arms of his chair, trying to steady himself. "She's mine," he whispered. The truth he'd suspected but feared to voice finally out in the open. "Jasmine is my daughter." Carl nodded solemnly. "The timing matches up with when you and Laura were last together, and I managed to obtain a sample of Jasmine's DNA, don't ask me how, and ran it against the sample you provided. It's a match, Mr. Miller. Jasmine is, without a doubt, your biological daughter." Thomas felt like he'd been hit by a truck. He had a daughter, a child he'd never known about, never held, never watched grow up. 22 years of birthdays, Christmases, first days of school, all gone in the blink of an eye. "Why?" he choked out. "Why didn't Laura tell me?" Carl sighed, flipping through his notes. "That's where things get complicated, Mr. Miller. From what I've been able to piece together, Laura tried to contact you several times after she found out she was pregnant. But you'd changed your number when you moved to New York, and her emails went unanswered, probably lost in the shuffle of your new job." The weight of guilt crashed down on Thomas. He remembered that time, how consumed he'd been with his career, how he'd let everything else fall by the wayside. Had he really been so careless, so self-absorbed, that he'd missed Laura's attempts to reach him? "Eventually," Carl continued, "Laura gave up trying. She had her parents' support, and she was determined to give Jasmine the best life she could as a single mother. By all accounts, she's done an admirable job. Jasmine was an honor student, involved in numerous extracurricular activities. She graduated from the University of Colorado last year with a degree in culinary arts." Thomas listened, drinking in every detail about the daughter he'd never known. Pride mingled with an aching sense of loss for all the moments he'd missed. "There's more," Carl said, his tone cautious. "In my investigations, I uncovered something that might explain why Laura never pursued you more aggressively." He pulled out a newspaper clipping from the file. "This ran in the Chicago Tribune about 7 months after you moved to New York." Thomas took the clipping with trembling hands. It was a society page announcement, complete with a photo of him standing next to a stunning blonde woman. The headline read, "Rising Star Architect Thomas Miller, engaged to socialite Melissa Worthington." The memory hit Thomas like a physical blow. Melissa had been the daughter of one of his firm's biggest clients. Their engagement had been a publicity stunt, orchestrated by the firm to cement a major contract. It had lasted all of 3 months before falling apart, but in that time, it had been splashed across every society page in New York and Chicago. "Oh God," Thomas groaned, the full implication dawning on him. "Laura must have seen this. She must have thought that you'd moved on," Carl finished gently, "that you were starting a new life, one that didn't have room for her or a baby." Thomas felt sick. All these years, All the missed opportunities, the misunderstandings that had kept him from his child, it was almost too much to bear. "Mr. Miller," Carl's voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "I know this is a lot to take in, but you need to decide what you're going to do with this information. Do you want to make contact? Do you want me to arrange a meeting?" The question hung in the air, fraught with possibility and peril. Thomas stared at the photo of Jasmine that Carl had included in the file, a recent one, showing her smiling broadly in her memory aroma apron. She had his eyes, he realized with a start, and Laura's smile. "I need to see them," Thomas said, his voice rough with emotion. "Both of them. I need to explain, to apologize, to try and make this right somehow." Carl nodded, closing the file. "I'll make the arrangements. But Mr. Miller, a word of advice. Tread carefully. You're about to upend 2 decades of history. Be prepared for anger, for resentment, for confusion. This won't be easy for any of you." As Thomas left Carl's office, his mind was reeling. He had a daughter. Laura had been in Denver all along. The life he thought he knew, the narrative he'd constructed for himself, it was all built on a foundation of misconceptions and missed connections. Driving back to his office, Thomas felt like a stranger in his own skin. The trappings of success that surrounded him, the expensive car, the tailored suit, the corner office waiting for him, suddenly seemed hollow, meaningless in the face of what he'd lost, of the family he'd never known. As he walked through the offices of Miller Construction, he was acutely aware of the curious glances from his employees. Had the change in him been that obvious? He nodded absently to Sarah as he passed her desk, barely registering her concerned expression. Once inside his office, Thomas sank into his chair, swiveling to face the window. The Rocky Mountains loomed in the distance, as immovable and indifferent as ever, but for Thomas the world had shifted on its axis. Everything he thought he knew about his life, about his past and his future, had been turned upside down. He pulled out his phone, his finger hovering over the contact for Mark Johnson. He needed to talk to someone, to try and make sense of the emotional tsunami threatening to overwhelm him. But what could he say? How could he explain the magnitude of what he'd just learned? In the end, Thomas set the phone down without making the call. This was his burden to bear, at least for now. He had to figure out his next steps, had to find a way to approach Laura and Jasmine without completely shattering the life they'd built without him. As the sun began to set, painting the Denver skyline in hues of orange and pink, Thomas Miller sat alone in his office, grappling with the consequences of choices made long ago and the daunting prospect of a future he'd never imagined. The successful businessman, always in control, always 3 steps ahead, now found himself adrift in uncharted emotional waters, with no clear path forward. But one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The carefully constructed walls he'd built around his heart over the past 2 decades were crumbling, and in their place, a fragile hope was beginning to take root. A hope for redemption, for connection, for the chance to know the daughter he'd never known he had. As night fell over Denver, Thomas made a silent promise to himself, to Laura, and to Jasmine. He would find a way to make this right, no matter the cost. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with emotional landmines and the weight of 22 years of absence. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Thomas felt a sense of purpose that went beyond business success or personal ambition. He had a family to fight for, a past to reconcile and a future to rebuild. And Thomas Miller was nothing if not a builder. With a deep breath, he turned away from the window and began to plan his next move, knowing that the hardest journey of his life was only just beginning. The autumn chill had deepened in the days following Thomas's meeting with Carl Davidson. As he stood outside East High School, watching students and teachers filter out at the end of the day, Thomas felt a sense of unreality wash over him. Was he really here, about to confront the woman he'd once loved, the mother of his child? He spotted her immediately. Laura Carter hadn't changed as much as he'd feared she might have. Her chestnut hair was shorter now, brushing her shoulders instead of cascading down her back. There were fine lines around her eyes and mouth, testament to the years that had passed, but her green eyes were as bright and expressive as ever. She walked with purpose, a stack of papers tucked under one arm, completely unaware of the man watching her from across the parking lot. Thomas's heart hammered in his chest as he stepped forward. "Laura," he called, his voice catching slightly on her name. She turned, confusion flickering across her face before recognition dawned. The papers she'd been holding slipped from her grasp, scattering across the pavement. Thomas, she breathed, her voice a mixture of disbelief and something else. Fear, anger. He couldn't quite tell. I'm sorry, Thomas said, bending to help her gather the fallen papers. I didn't mean to startle you. Laura seemed frozen for a moment before she knelt beside him, her movements mechanical. What are you doing here, Thomas? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He handed her the last of the papers, their fingers brushing momentarily. The contact sent a jolt through him, memories of softer touches and gentler times flooding his mind. We need to talk, Laura. Please. She straightened, clutching the papers to her chest like a shield. Her eyes darted around the parking lot, now mostly empty save for a few lingering students. This isn't the place, she said finally. There's a coffee shop around the corner. We can talk there. The walk to the coffee shop was silent, tension thrumming between them like a live wire. Thomas had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head, but now that it was here, all his carefully prepared words seemed to evaporate. They found a quiet corner table, ordered their drinks. Laura still took her coffee with 2 sugars, he noted absently. And then there was nothing left to delay the inevitable. How did you find me? Laura asked, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. Thomas took a deep breath. I met Jasmine, he said simply, at a coffee shop downtown. She was wearing your ring. Laura's hand flew to her throat where the chain holding that very ring now rested. Oh, she breathed, realization dawning in her eyes. And you? I hired a private investigator, Thomas admitted. Laura, why didn't you tell me? All these years, why didn't you let me know I had a daughter? The pain and accusation in his voice seemed to ignite something in Laura. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and old hurt. I tried, Thomas, she said, her voice low and intense. I called, I emailed, but you were always too busy, always had something more important going on. And then I saw the announcement of your engagement in the paper, and She trailed off, blinking back tears. Thomas felt the weight of his past mistakes pressing down on him. That engagement was a publicity stunt, he said quietly. It didn't last. If I had known, Laura, if I had any idea, would it have made a difference? Laura challenged. You were building your empire, Thomas. There was no room in your life for a baby for me. The truth of her words stung, but Thomas pressed on. I would have made room, he insisted. I would have done right by you, by Jasmine. I've missed so much, Laura, her whole life. Laura's expression softened slightly. She's had a good life, Thomas. I've made sure of that. She's smart, kind, talented. She's everything I could have hoped for in a daughter. Tell me about her, Thomas pleaded. Please, I want to know everything. For the next hour, Laura shared stories of Jasmine's childhood, her first steps, her love of cooking that manifested early, her struggles and triumphs in school. Thomas listened with rapt attention, trying to picture each moment, aching for the time he'd lost. As Laura's stories wound down, a heavy silence fell between them. Finally, Thomas spoke. I want to meet her, Laura, properly, as her father. Laura's grip tightened on her mug. I don't know if that's a good idea, she said hesitantly. It would change everything for her. Doesn't she deserve to know the truth? Thomas argued. Don't I deserve a chance to be a part of her life? Laura was quiet for a long moment, conflict evident in her eyes. You're right, she said finally. She does deserve the truth. But Thomas, you have to understand, this will be a shock for her. She's never asked about her father, never seemed to feel that absence. If we do this, we do it on her terms, at her pace. Agreed? Thomas nodded, relief and anxiety warring within him. Agreed. When should we tell her? They decided on the following evening. Laura would invite Jasmine over for dinner, as she often did, and they would break the news together. As they parted ways outside the coffee shop, Thomas felt a glimmer of hope beneath the tumult of emotions. Laura, he called as she turned to leave. She paused, looking back at him. Thank you, he said simply, for raising her, for being the parent I couldn't be. I know I have a lot to make up for, but I want to try, if you'll let me. Laura's expression was unreadable for a moment, before she offered a small, sad smile. Good night, Thomas, she said softly, before walking away into the gathering dusk. The next evening found Thomas pacing nervously in Laura's cozy living room. Family photos adorned the walls, each one a stark reminder of the life he'd missed out on. Jasmine's high school graduation portrait, her bright smile so like her mother's, seemed to watch him accusingly. Thomas, please sit down, Laura said from the kitchen doorway. You're making me dizzy, he complied, perching on the edge of the sofa. Sorry, he mumbled. I'm just nervous? Laura finished. Join the club. She ran a hand through her hair, a gesture so familiar it made Thomas's heart ache. Jasmine just texted, she's on her way. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Thomas found himself studying every photo, every memento in the room, trying to piece together the life his daughter had lived without him. A trophy for a high school cooking competition, a framed article from the school newspaper praising the young chef's innovative recipes. So much talent, so much life, and he'd missed it all. The sound of a key in the lock made them both jump. "Mom," Jasmine's voice called out. "Sorry, I'm late. The bus was running behind. What did you want to talk about that was so—" She stopped short as she entered the living room, her eyes widening as she recognized Thomas. "Oh, you're the guy from the coffee shop. What are you doing here?" Thomas stood, his heart racing. "Hello, Jasmine," he managed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. Laura stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Jasmine's arm. "Honey, why don't you sit down? There's something we need to tell you." Confusion and a hint of wariness crossed Jasmine's face as she sank into an armchair. "Mom, what's going on?" Laura took a deep breath, glancing at Thomas before focusing on her daughter. "Jasmine, sweetheart, do you remember the stories I've told you about my time in college? About the man I was in love with?" Jasmine nodded slowly. "Yeah, the one who gave you that ring. You said he was your first love, but things didn't work out." "That's right," Laura said softly. "Well, there's more to that story. A lot more." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "Jasmine, this is Thomas Miller. He's your father." The silence that followed was deafening. Jasmine's gaze darted between Laura and Thomas, disbelief etched on her features. "What?" she finally managed. "Mom, what are you talking about? I don't have a father." Thomas felt each word like a physical blow, but he forced himself to stay silent, to let Laura handle this as they'd agreed. "You do, sweetheart," Laura said gently. "I know this is a shock, but it's the truth. Thomas and I lost touch before I knew I was pregnant with you. There were misunderstandings, complications, but he's here now, and he wants to get to know you." Jasmine stood abruptly, shaking her head. "This is crazy," she said, her voice rising. "Why now? Why after all this time?" She turned to Thomas, anger flashing in her eyes. His eyes, he realized with a start. "Where have you been for the past 22 years? Thomas stepped forward, his hands spread in a placating gesture. "Jasmine, I know this is a lot to take in. I didn't know about you until recently. If I had, I swear I would have been here. I would have been a part of your life." "You didn't know?" Jasmine scoffed. "How is that possible? Didn't you ever wonder? Didn't you ever try to find out what happened to Mom?" The accusation in her voice was palpable, and Thomas felt the full weight of his past mistakes pressing down on him. "I made a lot of wrong choices," he admitted. "I was young, ambitious, focused on my career. I let the most important things slip away. But Jasmine, if I could go back and change it all, I would. In a heartbeat." Jasmine turned to her mother, tears welling in her eyes. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? All these years, why keep it a secret?" Laura moved to her daughter's side, reaching out to take her hand. "I thought I was protecting you," she said softly. "And maybe, in some ways, I was protecting myself too. It wasn't an easy decision, sweetheart, but I always tried to do what I thought was best for you." Jasmine pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "I need some air," she said, her voice choked with emotion. I can't deal with this right now." Before either Laura or Thomas could react, Jasmine had grabbed her keys and bolted for the door. The sound of it slamming behind her echoed through the suddenly silent house. Laura sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "That could have gone better," she murmured. Thomas stood frozen, torn between the urge to go after Jasmine and the knowledge that she needed space. "Should we—" he began. Laura shook her head. "Give her time," she said. "This is a lot for her to process. She'll come back when she's ready." The hours that followed were some of the longest of Thomas's life. He and Laura sat in stilted silence, each lost in their own thoughts and regrets. As midnight approached with still no word from Jasmine, Laura's worry began to overshadow her calm facade. "I'm going to call her," she said, reaching for her phone. Just then, they heard the sound of a key in the lock. Jasmine slipped in quietly, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Jasmine," Laura breathed, relief evident in her voice. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Jasmine nodded slowly. "I'm sorry I ran out like that," she said. I needed to think." Thomas stood, unsure of what to say or do. Jasmine turned to him, her expression guarded but no longer openly hostile. "I have questions," she said simply. "Of course," Thomas replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Anything you want to know, Jasmine. I'm an open book." They settled back into the living room, the air thick with tension and unspoken words. Jasmine took a deep breath, then began her interrogation. She asked about Thomas's life, his career, why he'd never married. She wanted to know about his family, her grandparents she'd never met. With each question, with each honest, sometimes painful answer, the ice between them began to thaw ever so slightly. As the night wore on, their conversation shifted. Jasmine began to share bits of her own life, her passion for cooking, her dreams of opening her own restaurant someday. Thomas listened with rapt attention, drinking in every detail of the daughter he was just beginning to know. It was nearly dawn when Jasmine finally ran out of questions. She looked between her parents, exhaustion and emotion clear on her face. "I don't know how to feel about all of this," she admitted. "It's like my whole life has been turned upside down." Thomas leaned forward, his heart aching to comfort her but unsure if he had the right. "Jasmine, I know this is overwhelming, and I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but if you're willing, I'd like the chance to get to know you, to be a part of your life in whatever way you're comfortable with." Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. Finally, she nodded. I think I'd like that," she said softly. "But I need time. This is all so much to take in." "Of course," Thomas agreed quickly. "We'll take it at your pace, Jasmine, I promise." As the first rays of sunlight began to peek through the windows, a tentative plan began to take shape. They would start slow, maybe a dinner once a week, a chance for Jasmine to get to know Thomas in a low-pressure environment. Laura would be there too, a buffer and a bridge between the past and the present. When Jasmine finally retreated to her old room to get some much-needed rest, Thomas and Laura found themselves alone once more. The weight of the night's revelations and emotional upheavals hung heavy between them. "Thank you," Thomas said quietly, "for giving me this chance, for raising such an amazing daughter." Laura offered a tired smile. "She is amazing, isn't she? But Thomas, you need to understand, this isn't going to be easy. Jasmine's whole world has just been turned upside down. There will be good days and bad days. Are you prepared for that?" Thomas nodded solemnly. "I'm in this for the long haul, Laura. Whatever it takes, however long it takes. I want to be the father Jasmine deserves." As Thomas left Laura's house that morning, stepping out into a world that seemed somehow brighter despite his exhaustion, he felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. There was hope, certainly, and a deep, aching love for the daughter he was just beginning to know. But there was also fear of failing Jasmine, of not living up to the father she deserved, of somehow messing up this precious second chance he'd been given. The coming weeks and months would be a delicate dance of getting to know each other, of building trust and understanding. There would be missteps and misunderstandings, moments of connection and moments of frustration. But as Thomas drove home that morning, the sun rising over the Denver skyline, he made a silent vow to himself and to the family he'd only just found. He would be patient. He would be understanding. He would be there, in whatever capacity Jasmine needed him to be. And maybe, just maybe, they could build something beautiful from the ashes of the past. The road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, Thomas felt truly alive. He had a purpose now, something far greater than building skyscrapers or amassing wealth. He had a chance to be a father, to know his daughter, to right the wrongs of the past. As he pulled into his driveway, Thomas realized that his life would never be the same. The carefully constructed world he'd built for himself was changing, expanding to include a family he'd never known he had. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. With a deep breath, Thomas stepped out of his car and into his new reality. The journey of becoming a father, truly becoming a father, was just beginning, and he was ready for every step of it, no matter how challenging the path might be. The weeks that followed were a delicate balancing act for Thomas, Laura, and Jasmine. True to their agreement, they started with weekly dinners, alternating between Laura's cozy home and upscale restaurants that Thomas chose, hoping to impress, but often missing the mark. Their first dinner out was at Le Petit Chateau, an exclusive French restaurant in downtown Denver. Thomas had pulled strings to get a last-minute reservation, eager to provide an experience that would dazzle Jasmine. But as they sat amidst the crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths, the stilted conversation and Jasmine's obvious discomfort made it clear that this wasn't the right approach. "So, Jasmine," Thomas began, desperately trying to fill the awkward silence, "your mother tells me you're quite the chef. Do you have a favorite cuisine to work with?" Jasmine, who had been pushing her foie gras around her plate with disinterest, looked up. "I actually prefer simpler comfort foods," she said. "Things that bring people together, you know, not—" She gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. "All this." Thomas felt a pang of disappointment, but he quickly pushed it aside. "I'd love to try your cooking sometime," he said sincerely. "Maybe next week, instead of going out, you could make dinner for us." The smile that lit up Jasmine's face was worth more than any Michelin-starred meal. "Really, you'd want that?" "Of course," Thomas replied, feeling like he'd finally done something right. "I want to know everything about you, Jasmine, including your passion for cooking." Laura, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of concern and hope, relaxed slightly. "That sounds wonderful," she added. "Maybe you could make that butternut squash risotto you've been perfecting." And so, the following week, found them in Laura's kitchen, with Jasmine confidently directing her parents as they chopped vegetables and stirred pots. The atmosphere was lighter, filled with laughter and the aromatic scents of herbs and spices. As they sat down to eat, Thomas realized that this simple meal, cooked together, meant more than any fancy restaurant ever could. "This is incredible, Jasmine," he said, savoring a bite of the creamy risotto. "You have a real talent." Jasmine beamed with pride. "Thanks, Dad," she said, the words still sounding foreign on her tongue, but no less sincere. Thomas felt his heart swell at the simple word. It was a small step, but a significant one. As the weeks passed, they fell into a rhythm. Jasmine began to open up more, sharing stories from her childhood and her dreams for the future. Thomas listened with rapt attention, trying to absorb every detail to make up for lost time. One evening, as they were clearing the dishes after another of Jasmine's culinary creations, she hesitantly broached a subject that had been on her mind. "So, I've been thinking," she began, her eyes focused on the plate she was drying. "You mentioned before that you're in construction, right?" Thomas nodded, curious where this was going. "That's right, Miller Construction. We've built quite a few of the buildings in downtown Denver." Jasmine took a deep breath. "Well, I've been looking at spaces for my restaurant idea, and I was wondering, maybe you could help me understand what to look for, in terms of the building structure and all that." Thomas felt a surge of excitement. This was something he could do, a way he could contribute his expertise to his daughter's dream. "I'd be honored, Jasmine," he said warmly. "In fact, if you'd like, I could take you on a tour of some properties I think might work well for a restaurant, show you what to look for, what to avoid." The smile that lit up Jasmine's face was all the answer he needed. The next Saturday, Thomas picked up Jasmine in his Mercedes, a stack of property listings on the back seat. As they drove through the city, Thomas pointed out various buildings his company had worked on, explaining the challenges and triumphs of each project. "You really love what you do, don't you?" Jasmine observed, as Thomas enthusiastically described the innovative green technology they'd incorporated into a recent office building. Thomas nodded, a bit surprised by the realization. "I do," he admitted. "I guess I've always been fascinated by the idea of creating something lasting, something that changes the skyline and impacts people's lives." Jasmine was quiet for a moment. "I think I understand that," she said slowly. "That's kind of how I feel about cooking, creating something that brings people together, that becomes a part of their memories and experiences." Thomas glanced at his daughter, struck by the insight. "You're right," he said softly. "I never thought about it that way before." They spent the afternoon touring potential restaurant spaces, with Thomas explaining the pros and cons of each location. He pointed out structural issues to be aware of, discussed the importance of kitchen layout and ventilation, and shared tips on negotiating leases. As they stood in an empty storefront with large windows overlooking a bustling street, Jasmine's eyes lit up. "I can see it," she said excitedly. "The bar would go there, with shelves of colorful bottles catching the light, and over here we could have an open kitchen, so diners can see the chefs at work." Thomas watched her, marveling at her passion and vision. In that moment he saw not just his daughter, but a driven young woman with dreams as big as his own had once been. "It's perfect," he agreed. "And you know, if you decide this is the place, I'd be happy to help with the renovations. My company could handle the construction work at cost. Jasmine turned to him, her expression a mix of surprise and gratitude. You'd do that? Thomas nodded. Of course. That's what family does, right? We support each other's dreams. Impulsively, Jasmine hugged him. It was their first real embrace, and Thomas found himself blinking back tears as he held his daughter close. As they drove back to Laura's house, Jasmine was bubbling with excitement, her mind racing with ideas for her restaurant. Thomas listened, offering suggestions and encouragement, his heart full of pride and a growing sense of connection. When they arrived, Laura was waiting on the porch, a look of anticipation on her face. How did it go? She asked as they approached. Jasmine launched into an enthusiastic recap of their day, describing the perfect space they'd found and all the ideas she had for it. Laura listened with a smile, her eyes meeting Thomas's over their daughter's head. In that moment, Thomas felt a shift in the air between them. The tension that had lingered since his reappearance in their lives seemed to ease, replaced by a shared joy in their daughter's happiness. Later, as Thomas was preparing to leave, Laura pulled him aside. "Thank you," she said softly, "for doing this, for being there for her." Thomas shook his head. "You don't need to thank me, Laura. I'm just grateful for the chance to be a part of her life, of both your lives, if you'll let me." Laura was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. I think we're all still figuring this out," she said finally. "But seeing you with Jasmine today, seeing how happy she is, it feels right somehow." As Thomas drove home that night, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and potential pitfalls, but for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Jasmine signed the lease on the restaurant space, and Thomas threw himself into the renovation plans with gusto. He brought in his best team, determined to create the perfect canvas for his daughter's culinary dreams. Laura, too, became more involved, offering her insights on design and ambience. The three of them spent countless evenings poring over plans, debating color schemes, and taste-testing potential menu items. As they worked side by side, the bonds between them grew stronger. Jasmine began to open up more about her childhood, sharing stories that filled in the gaps of the years Thomas had missed. In turn, Thomas shared tales of his own youth, of the dreams and ambitions that had driven him to success, but also cost him so much. One evening, as they sat amid sawdust and paint samples in the half-finished restaurant, Jasmine turned to Thomas with a serious expression. "Dad?" she began, the word now coming naturally to her. "I've been thinking. I know we've come a long way these past few months, but there's still so much I don't know about you, about your family." Thomas nodded, understanding her unspoken question. "You're right," he said, "and you deserve to know everything. What would you like to know?" Jasmine took a deep breath. "I'd like to meet them," she said. "Your parents, my grandparents. And do I have any aunts or uncles, cousins?" Thomas felt a mixture of joy and apprehension at her request. His relationship with his own parents had been strained for years, his single-minded focus on his career creating a distance that had never fully healed. "You have grandparents," he said slowly. "My parents, Robert and Eleanor Miller. They live in Chicago. And I have a younger sister, Sarah, who lives in Seattle with her husband and 2 kids. Jasmine's eyes widened. "I have cousins." Thomas nodded, a pang of guilt hitting him as he realized how much family Jasmine had been missing out on. "You do. Emma is 12 and Jack is 9. They're great kids. I haven't been as good about staying in touch as I should have been." Jasmine was quiet for a moment, processing this new information. "Do they know about me?" she asked finally. Thomas shook his head. "No, they don't. I haven't told them yet. I wanted to make sure you were comfortable with everything first." Jasmine nodded, her expression thoughtful. I think I'd like to meet them. All of them. If that's okay." Thomas felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, hope, and a touch of anxiety. "Of course it's okay," he said. "I'll make the arrangements. Maybe we could all go to Chicago for Thanksgiving. Meet the whole family at once." The smile that lit up Jasmine's face was all the answer he needed. As Thomas left the restaurant site that night, his mind was already racing with plans. He had calls to make, explanations to give, and a family reunion to organize. It would be challenging, no doubt. There would be hurt feelings to soothe, misunderstandings to clear up, and 2 decades of absence to account for. But as he drove through the quiet streets of Denver, Thomas felt a sense of hope and purpose that had been missing from his life for far too long. He had a chance to not only be a father to Jasmine, but to reconnect with his own parents and sister, to rebuild the family ties he'd allowed to weaken over the years. The road ahead would not be easy, but Thomas was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, because now he understood what truly mattered. It wasn't the buildings he'd constructed or the wealth he'd accumulated. It was the relationships he'd build, the love he'd share, and the family he'd nurture. As he pulled into his driveway, Thomas made a silent promise to himself, to Jasmine, and to all the family members he'd neglected over the years. He would do better. He would be present. He would love fiercely and unconditionally, because that, he now realized, was the true measure of a successful life. As autumn gave way to winter in Denver, the relationship between Thomas and Jasmine continued to blossom like a hardy flower, pushing through the frost. Their weekly dinners had become a cherished ritual, a time for sharing not just meals, but stories, dreams, and the gradual healing of old wounds. One chilly evening in early December, they sat in Laura's cozy living room, the remnants of Jasmine's latest culinary experiment, a fusion of traditional American comfort food with Asian flavors, still lingering on their palates. Thomas watched his daughter as she animatedly described her latest ideas for menu innovations, her eyes sparkling with passion. "You know," Thomas said during a lull in the conversation, "I've been thinking about your dream of opening a restaurant. Have you started looking at potential locations yet?" Jasmine's excitement dimmed slightly. "I've looked," she admitted, "but everything in a good location is so expensive. I've been saving up from my job at Memory Aroma, but at this rate, it'll be years before I can afford anything decent." Thomas exchanged a glance with Laura, who nodded almost imperceptibly. They had discussed this privately, wanting to support Jasmine's dreams without overwhelming her. "What if," Thomas began carefully, "I could help with that, not just financially, but with my experience in real estate and construction?" Jasmine's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Thomas leaned forward, his voice filled with enthusiasm. "I'm proposing a partnership, Jasmine. Miller Construction has connections all over the city. We could find the perfect location, handle the renovations, and I could invest in the startup costs. You'd be the majority owner, of course, with full creative control over the menu and concept." The room fell silent as Jasmine processed this offer. Laura watched her daughter carefully, ready to intervene if needed. But it was Jasmine who spoke first, her voice a mix of excitement and hesitation. That's an incredible offer, Dad," she said, the word Dad still sending a thrill through Thomas every time he heard it. "But it's also a lot. I don't want you to think you have to do this to make up for lost time or anything." Thomas shook his head, reaching out to take Jasmine's hand. "This isn't about making up for anything," he said softly. "It's about believing in you and your talent. It's what any father would do for their child if they could. But Jasmine, if you're not comfortable with it, there's no pressure. This is your dream, and it should happen on your terms." Jasmine was quiet for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. Then slowly a smile spread across her face. "Okay," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Let's do it. Partners?" Thomas felt his heart swell with pride and joy. "Partners," he agreed, shaking her hand formally before pulling her into a hug. Laura watched the scene with misty eyes, a bittersweet smile on her face. As Jasmine and Thomas began to excitedly discuss potential locations, she slipped into the kitchen, needing a moment to compose herself. Thomas found her there a few minutes later, staring out the window at the snow-dusted backyard. "Laura," he said softly, "are you okay with all this? I should have discussed it with you first, I'm sorry." She turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's fine, Thomas, more than fine. It's wonderful to see you two connecting like this. It's just..." She trailed off, searching for the right words. "A lot of changes, very quickly," Thomas supplied. Laura nodded. "Exactly. But they're good changes. Jasmine deserves this opportunity, and I'm grateful you can provide it for her." Thomas stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on Laura's shoulder. "We're providing it together," he said. "You've given her everything for the past 22 years. Now it's my turn to contribute. But Laura, I want you to be part of this too if you're willing. Your insights, your support, they're invaluable to both of us." Laura looked up at him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I'd like that," she said. "Thank you, Thomas." As they rejoined Jasmine in the living room, the atmosphere was charged with excitement and possibility. The next few months would be a whirlwind of activity as they worked to bring Jasmine's dream to life. The search for the perfect location took them through various neighborhoods in Denver. They explored trendy, up-and-coming areas, established restaurant districts, and everything in between. Jasmine had a clear vision of what she wanted, a space with character, history, and the potential to become a warm, welcoming haven for food lovers. It was Thomas who finally found it, an old brick building in the heart of the historic Lodo district. The ground floor had once housed a beloved local bookstore, but had stood empty for the past year. As soon as Jasmine stepped inside, her eyes lit up. "This is it," she breathed, turning in a slow circle to take in the high ceilings, exposed brick walls and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. "Can't you just see it, Dad? The bar along that wall, tables here, and the open kitchen in the back so diners can see all the action." Thomas nodded, already mentally calculating the work that would need to be done. "It's perfect, sweetie, and the location couldn't be better. Lots of foot traffic, close to offices for the lunch crowd, and the nightlife scene for dinners and late-night bites." With the location secured, the real work began. Thomas threw himself into the project with gusto, leveraging his connections to fast-track permits and bringing in his best team for the renovations. Jasmine was there every step of the way, her chef's eye complementing Thomas's construction expertise. But the project wasn't without its challenges. The first major hurdle came when they discovered significant structural issues in the building's back wall. The repair would be costly and time-consuming, threatening to derail their timeline and budget. "We could cut costs in other areas," Thomas suggested during a tense meeting at the construction site. "Maybe scale back on some of the higher-end finishes." Jasmine shook her head firmly. "No, the ambience is crucial to the whole concept. We need to find another way." It was Laura who provided the solution. "What if," she said thoughtfully, "we turned this into an opportunity? Instead of hiding the repair work, we showcase it, make it part of the restaurant's story." And so, the crumbling brick wall became a feature, with parts of the repair work left visible behind a sheet of glass, accompanied by photos and stories of the building's history. It was a bold choice, but one that perfectly encapsulated the blend of old and new that Jasmine envisioned for her restaurant. As winter melted into spring, the empty shell of a building slowly transformed into Jasmine's dream restaurant. But it wasn't just the physical space that was evolving. The long hours spent working side by side, solving problems and celebrating small victories, were bringing Thomas and Jasmine closer than ever. One evening, as they sat amid sawdust and paint cans, sharing a pizza and going over design plans, Jasmine turned to Thomas with a serious expression. "Dad," she began, "I want you to know how much all of this means to me. Not just the restaurant, but everything. Getting to know you, working together like this. It's more than I ever imagined having." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Oh, Jasmine," he said softly, "you have no idea how much it means to me too. I've missed so much, and I can never get that time back. But being here now, being your father and your partner in this project, it's the greatest gift I could have ever received." Jasmine leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over the past months. "I used to wonder, you know," she said quietly, "about my dad, who he was, why he wasn't around. I made up all these stories in my head. And now?" Thomas asked, his heart racing. Jasmine lifted her head, meeting his eyes with a smile. "Now I know the truth, and I'm glad you're here, Dad. I'm glad we have this chance." As spring bloomed in Denver, so too did the restaurant take shape. The challenges were numerous: budget overruns, delayed shipments of crucial equipment, last-minute design changes. But Thomas and Jasmine faced each one together, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle overcome. Laura, true to her word, remained an integral part of the process. Her level-headed advice often provided the perfect balance to Thomas's ambitious ideas and Jasmine's creative vision. The three of them were becoming a true family unit, their individual strengths complementing each other perfectly. As the opening day approached, the excitement was palpable. Jasmine threw herself into menu planning and staff hiring, determined to create not just excellent food, but a warm, welcoming atmosphere that would make every guest feel at home. Thomas, for his part, found himself more invested in this project than any skyscraper or office complex he'd ever built. This wasn't just about constructing a physical space, it was about building a future for his daughter, creating a legacy that went beyond bricks and mortar. The night before the grand opening, Thomas, Laura and Jasmine stood in the finished restaurant, taking in the fruits of their labor. The space was everything Jasmine had dreamed of and more. Warm wood tones and exposed brick created a cozy atmosphere, while modern light fixtures and pops of color added a contemporary flair. The open kitchen gleamed with top-of-the-line equipment, ready for Jasmine and her team to work their culinary magic. "I can't believe it's really happening," Jasmine said, her voice filled with awe and a touch of nerves. "Tomorrow, this place will be full of people. What if they don't like the food? What if—" "Hey," Thomas interrupted gently, placing his hands on Jasmine's shoulders. "Everything is going to be amazing. Your food is incredible, the space is perfect, and you've put your heart and soul into every detail. The people of Denver won't know what hit them." Laura nodded in agreement, wrapping an arm around her daughter. "Your father's right, sweetheart. This is your moment. You've worked so hard for this, and we are so proud of you." Jasmine looked between her parents, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I couldn't have done any of this without you both," she said. "Thank you for everything." As they shared a group hug in the middle of the soon-to-be bustling restaurant, Thomas felt a sense of completion he'd never experienced before. This, he realized, was what true success felt like. Not the accolades or the financial gains, but the joy of helping his child achieve her dreams, of being part of something meaningful and lasting. The grand opening of Roots and Renewal, the name Jasmine had chosen to honor both her culinary philosophy and the journey that had brought her family back together, was a resounding success. The restaurant was packed from the moment the doors opened, with guests raving about both the innovative menu and the warm, inviting atmosphere. Thomas watched with pride as Jasmine worked the room, greeting guests and explaining dishes with confidence and charm. Laura, who had taken on the role of unofficial hostess for the night, expertly managed the flow of diners, her natural warmth making everyone feel welcome. As the night wound down and the last guest departed, Jasmine emerged from the kitchen, her chef's whites splattered, but her face glowing with triumph. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "We really did it." Thomas pulled her into a hug, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You did it, sweetheart," he corrected gently. "This is all you." Laura joined them, wrapping her arms around both Thomas and Jasmine. "I think," she said softly, "that this calls for a toast." They retreated to a quiet corner of the bar, where Thomas poured 3 glasses of champagne. Raising his glass, he looked at the 2 women who had become the center of his world. "To Jasmine," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "for her incredible talent, vision, and determination. To Laura, for her unwavering support and the amazing job she did raising our daughter. And to new beginnings, second chances, and the power of family." As they clinked glasses, Thomas felt a sense of peace wash over him. The journey to this moment had been long and often difficult, filled with missed opportunities and painful regrets. But standing here in this beautiful space that represented not just Jasmine's dream, but the rebuilding of their family, he knew that every step had been worth it. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its own challenges. Running a restaurant was no easy task, and they were still navigating the complexities of their newfound family dynamic. But Thomas was no longer afraid of the future. He had his daughter in his life, a renewed connection with Laura, and a sense of purpose that went beyond his own success. As they sat together, sharing quiet laughter and heartfelt conversation in the afterglow of their triumph, Thomas realized that he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. It wasn't in the skyscrapers he'd built, or the fortunes he'd amassed. It was here, in the love of his family, and the joy of watching his daughter's dreams come true. The restaurant around them stood as a testament to their journey, a place where old wounds could heal, where new memories could be forged, and where the bonds of family, once broken, could be renewed stronger than ever. Like the very name of the restaurant suggested, they had rediscovered their roots and found renewal in the process. As the first light of dawn began to peek through the windows, Thomas, Laura, and Jasmine raised their glasses one more time. "To family," Jasmine said softly, her eyes shining with love and gratitude. "To family," Thomas and Laura echoed, their voices blending in perfect harmony. And in that moment, surrounded by the fruits of their labor and the warmth of their reconnected family, Thomas knew that this feeling of belonging, of purpose, of unconditional love, was the greatest success he would ever achieve. In the weeks following the successful opening of Roots and Renewal, Thomas found himself adjusting to a new rhythm of life. His mornings, once filled with board meetings and site inspections, now often began with early visits to the restaurant. He'd arrive just as Jasmine was prepping for the day, bringing with him fresh pastries from a local bakery and a thermos of Laura's home-brewed coffee. These quiet moments before the hustle of the day became a treasured ritual for father and daughter. They'd sit at the bar, discussing menu changes, sharing stories, and planning for the future. Thomas was continually amazed by Jasmine's creativity and business acumen. She had inherited his drive and determination, but tempered it with a warmth and empathy that he recognized as purely Laura. One morning, as they were reviewing the previous night's receipts, Jasmine looked up at Thomas with a mischievous glint in her eye. "You know, Dad," she began, "I've been thinking. We've got this great space, and it's empty most mornings. What if we started doing breakfasts?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Breakfasts? That's a big undertaking, sweetheart. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Jasmine nodded enthusiastically. "I've been experimenting with some ideas. Imagine gourmet breakfast burritos, artisanal pastries, maybe even a build-your-own waffle bar on weekends. We could tap into a whole new market." Thomas couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. It reminded him of himself at her age, always looking for the next big opportunity. But he also felt a twinge of concern. "It sounds wonderful, Jasmine, but I'm worried about you overextending yourself. You're already working long hours as it is." Jasmine's face fell slightly, and Thomas immediately regretted his words. He was still learning how to balance being supportive with his instinct to protect her from potential pitfalls. "I'm not saying no," he quickly added. "I just want to make sure we think it through carefully. Why don't we create a business plan? Look at the numbers, the staffing needs, maybe even do a trial run." The smile returned to Jasmine's face, brighter than ever. "Really? You'll help me plan it?" Thomas reached out and squeezed her hand. "Of course I will. That's what partners do, right?" Over the next few weeks, Thomas and Jasmine threw themselves into planning the breakfast expansion. They spent long evenings poring over spreadsheets, researching suppliers, and debating the merits of various menu items. Laura often joined them, offering her practical insights and occasionally playing referee when father and daughter's stubborn streaks clashed. One such evening, as they sat surrounded by sample menus and cost projections, Laura watched Thomas and Jasmine with a soft smile. They were so alike in many ways, the furrowed brow of concentration, the excited gestures as they discussed ideas. Yet she could also see the differences. Where Thomas was all about efficiency and profit margins, Jasmine brought a focus on sustainability and community engagement. "What if," Jasmine was saying, "we partnered with local farms for our ingredients? We could have a rotating menu based on what's in season. It might be a bit more expensive, but I think our customers would appreciate the quality and the support for local businesses." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "That's a great idea. We could even feature a farm of the month. Maybe do some special events with the farmers. It would be good PR and could bring in a new customer base." Laura chimed in. "And what about involving the community in other ways? Maybe we could do a weekly pay-what-you-can breakfast to help those who might not be able to afford a meal out otherwise." Both Thomas and Jasmine turned to her, surprised and impressed by the suggestion. "Mum, that's brilliant," Jasmine exclaimed. "We could partner with local shelters or community centers to spread the word." Thomas felt a surge of pride and love for both of them. This was so much more than just a business venture. It was a chance to make a real difference in people's lives, to create something meaningful together as a family. As the plans for the breakfast expansion took shape, so too did the bonds between Thomas, Jasmine, and Laura continue to strengthen. They were no longer just co-parents or business partners, but a true family unit, supporting and challenging each other in equal measure. The trial run of the breakfast menu was scheduled for a Saturday morning in early summer. Thomas arrived at the restaurant before dawn, nervous energy thrumming through him. He found Jasmine already in the kitchen, her hair tied back and a determined set to her jaw as she directed her staff in the final preparations. "Ready for this?" he asked, tying on an apron. He'd insisted on being part of the service team for the day, wanting to experience every aspect of the new venture. Jasmine shot him a grin. "Born ready, Dad. Let's do this." As the first customers began to trickle in, drawn by the irresistible aroma of freshly baked pastries and sizzling bacon, Thomas felt a sense of déjà vu. It reminded him of the grand opening night, but with a difference. This time, there was no anxiety, no fear of failure, just excitement and a deep-seated confidence in his daughter's abilities. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Thomas found himself bussing tables, refilling coffee cups and chatting with customers. He was struck by how many regulars from the dinner service had come to support the breakfast launch, and by the genuine affection they showed for Jasmine. "Your daughter is a real treasure," one elderly woman told him as he cleared her plate. "This neighborhood hasn't felt this alive in years. She's bringing people together, you know." Thomas felt his chest swell with pride. "She certainly is," he agreed. "I'm learning from her every day." As the last of the breakfast crowd filtered out, Thomas, Jasmine, and the staff gathered for a debrief. The trial run had been an unqualified success, with rave reviews for both the food and the atmosphere. "I think," Thomas said, looking around at the tired but happy faces, "we can officially say that Roots and Renewal is now serving breakfast." A cheer went up from the staff, and Jasmine threw her arms around Thomas in a spontaneous hug. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "Thank you for believing in me." Later that evening, as they celebrated with a quiet family dinner at Laura's house, Thomas found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. A year ago, he had been a successful but lonely man, focused solely on his business empire. Now he was part of something so much bigger and more fulfilling than he could have ever imagined. "A penny for your thoughts," Laura said softly, joining him on the porch where he'd stepped out for some air. Thomas smiled, watching as the sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am," he said, "to have this second chance, to be part of Jasmine's life, to have you both in my life." Laura was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You know," she said finally, "I used to be so angry with you, for not being there, for missing out on all those years with Jasmine. But seeing you now, seeing how you are with her, how much you've grown, I'm glad we found our way back to each other, Thomas. All of us." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. "Laura, But whatever he was about to say was interrupted by Jasmine calling from inside. "Hey, you two! The ice cream is melting and I'm not waiting any longer." They shared a laugh, the moment broken but not forgotten. As they headed back inside to join their daughter, Thomas felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead was still long, with challenges and obstacles yet to face, but together, as a family, he knew they could handle anything life threw their way. The success of the breakfast launch at Roots and Renewal marked a new chapter for the restaurant and for the Miller family. As summer progressed, the early morning crowds became a regular fixture, with lines often stretching down the block on weekends. Jasmine's idea to partner with local farms proved to be a masterstroke. Not only did it elevate the quality of their ingredients, but it also created a sense of community and purpose that resonated deeply with their customers. The Farm of the Month feature became a highlight, with guests eagerly anticipating each new collaboration. Thomas threw himself into this aspect of the business with unexpected enthusiasm. He found himself visiting farms on weekends, negotiating contracts, and even getting his hands dirty helping with harvests. It was a far cry from the corporate boardrooms he was used to, but he found it infinitely more satisfying. One crisp fall morning, Thomas found himself standing in an apple orchard, surrounded by trees heavy with ripe fruit. He was there to meet with the owners of a small family farm that Jasmine was considering for their October feature. As he waited, Thomas breathed in the crisp autumn air, marveling at the beauty around him. He thought back to the man he had been just a year ago, always in a rush, always chasing the next big deal, never taking the time to appreciate moments like this. "Mr. Miller?" a voice called, breaking him from his reverie. He turned to see a middle-aged couple approaching, their faces weathered but kind. "Tom and Sarah Johnson," the man said, extending his hand. "Welcome to Sunrise Orchards." As they walked through the rows of trees, discussing varieties of apples and potential menu ideas, Thomas felt a sense of connection to the land and the people who worked it that he'd never experienced before. He found himself sharing stories about Jasmine, about the restaurant, about the journey that had led him to this moment. "You know," Sarah said as they ended their tour, "it's not often we get restaurateurs out here, let alone the fathers of restaurateurs. It's clear how much you care about your daughter's vision." Thomas felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I'm learning every day," he said honestly. "Jasmine, she sees the world in a way I never did before. She's teaching me to slow down, to appreciate the smaller things, to see the value in connections beyond just business transactions. Tom nodded sagely. That's the thing about farming, he said. It forces you to slow down, to work with nature rather than against it. Sounds like your Jasmine understands that instinctively. As Thomas drove back to Denver that afternoon, his car filled with crates of sample apples, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. This new chapter of his life, sparked by the unexpected discovery of his daughter, had opened his eyes to a world of experiences and relationships he'd never known he was missing. Back at the restaurant, he found Jasmine in the kitchen, experimenting with new recipes. Her face lit up when she saw the apples, and soon they were both peeling, slicing, and brainstorming ideas for fall-themed dishes. "You know, Dad," Jasmine said as she stirred a pot of slowly caramelizing apples, "I never thanked you properly for all of this. Not just the financial support, but for jumping in with both feet, for being here, really here, every step of the way." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, pulling her into a one-armed hug. "You don't need to thank me. Being here, being part of your life and your dreams, it's the greatest gift I could have ever received. I'm the one who should be thanking you for giving me this chance, for opening my eyes to what really matters in life." As they stood there in the warm kitchen, the air rich with the scent of cinnamon and apples, Thomas knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The journey of the past year had been one of profound growth and change, not just for the restaurant, but for him personally. He had rediscovered his roots, in family, in community, in the simple joys of creating something meaningful. And in that rediscovery, he had found a renewal of spirit that no amount of corporate success could have ever provided. As autumn deepened and the holidays approached, roots and renewal continued to thrive. The restaurant had become more than just a place to eat. It was a gathering spot for the community, a place where connections were made and stories were shared over plates of lovingly prepared food. Thomas, Jasmine, and Laura were busier than ever, but it was a busyness filled with purpose and joy. They were building something together, something that went beyond business success. They were creating a legacy of love, of second chances, of the power of family to heal and grow. And for Thomas Miller, once driven solely by ambition and the pursuit of success, this new definition of achievement, measured in smiles shared, in lives touched, in moments of connection, was the most satisfying of all. The crisp autumn air carried a sense of anticipation as Denver prepared for the grand opening of Roots and Renewal. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of activity for Thomas, Jasmine, and Laura, with each day bringing new challenges and triumphs as they raced against the clock to perfect every detail of the restaurant. On the morning of the big day, Thomas arrived at the restaurant before dawn, his breath visible in the chilly air. As he approached the entrance, he paused to admire the newly installed signage. The words Roots and Renewal were etched in elegant script, backlit by a warm glow that seemed to promise comfort and culinary delights within. Inside, he found Jasmine already hard at work in the kitchen, her face a mask of concentration as she meticulously plated sample dishes for the evening's menu. The sight of his daughter, so focused and passionate about her craft, filled Thomas with a profound sense of pride and love. "Morning, sweetheart," he called out, hanging up his coat. "How are you feeling?" Jasmine looked up, a mix of excitement and anxiety playing across her features. "Nervous," she admitted. "Excited. Terrified. Is it possible to feel all those things at once?" Thomas chuckled, moving to give her a reassuring hug. "Absolutely. I'd be worried if you weren't feeling a little overwhelmed, but Jasmine, you've got this. You've worked so hard, and everything is going to be amazing." As they broke apart, Laura bustled in, her arms laden with fresh flowers for the dining room. "Good morning, you two," she said brightly. "Are we ready to make some magic happen?" The next few hours passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. Thomas found himself switching between roles, from businessman overseeing final payments to vendors, to handyman touching up paint and adjusting lighting, to emotional support for both Jasmine and Laura as the pressure of the impending opening began to mount. By mid-afternoon, the staff began to arrive for a final briefing. Thomas watched with pride as Jasmine addressed her team, her voice clear and confident as she outlined the evening's proceedings and emphasized the importance of making every guest feel welcome and valued. "Remember, she concluded, her eyes shining with passion. "We're not just serving food here, we're creating experiences, building community, and hopefully making a little bit of magic along the way. Now let's show Denver what Roots and Renewal is all about." As the team dispersed to their stations, Thomas pulled Jasmine aside. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and handed it to her. Jasmine opened it, gasping softly at the contents. Inside was a delicate silver charm bracelet. Among the charms were a tiny whisk, a miniature restaurant facade, and a heart engraved with the words, "Roots and Renewal." "Oh, Dad," Jasmine breathed, her eyes welling up with tears. "It's beautiful." Thomas helped her fasten it around her wrist. "I wanted you to have something special for tonight," he explained. "Something to remind you of how far you've come and how proud we are of you." Jasmine threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As the evening approached, the tension in the air was palpable. The staff moved with practiced efficiency, putting final touches on table settings and running through last-minute checks of equipment. In the kitchen, Jasmine's team worked like a well-oiled machine, prepping ingredients and ensuring every station was fully stocked and ready for the onslaught to come. Thomas found himself pacing nervously near the entrance, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time. He'd faced countless high-stakes business deals in his career, but somehow this felt more important than all of them combined. Laura appeared at his side, looking elegant in a deep blue dress. "Nervous?" she asked, a knowing smile playing on her lips. Thomas chuckled ruefully. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's known you for over 2 decades, Laura replied. She reached out, straightening his tie with a familiar gesture that sent a jolt of nostalgia through him. "She's going to be fine, Thomas, we all are." Before Thomas could respond, there was a commotion at the door. The first guests had arrived, food critics and local celebrities invited for a special pre-opening tasting. Thomas took a deep breath, plastered on his most charming smile, and moved to greet them. The next hour was a whirlwind of introductions, handshakes, and carefully orchestrated tours of the restaurant. Thomas found himself slipping easily into the role of proud father and investor, extolling the virtues of the farm-to-table concept and Jasmine's innovative menu. As the dining room filled with the soft murmur of conversation and the clink of glasses, Thomas caught glimpses of Jasmine through the open kitchen door. She moved with grace and authority, calling out orders and inspecting each plate before it left her domain. The nervousness of the morning had been replaced by a laser-like focus that reminded Thomas so much of himself in his younger days. At precisely 7:30 p.m., Jasmine emerged from the kitchen, looking radiant in her crisp chef's whites. The room fell silent as she made her way to the center, where a small stage had been set up for the official opening speech. Thomas felt his heart swell with pride as Jasmine took her place at the microphone, her posture straight and confident. She took a deep breath, her hand unconsciously touching the charm bracelet on her wrist, before beginning to speak. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Roots and Renewal," she began, her voice clear and strong. "This restaurant represents more than just a new dining experience in Denver. It's a testament to the power of second chances, of rediscovering our roots and finding renewal in unexpected places." As Jasmine continued her speech, weaving together the story of the restaurant's conception with her own journey of self-discovery and family reconnection, Thomas felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes. He glanced at Laura, standing nearby, and saw that she too was visibly moved. "None of this would have been possible without the support and love of my family," Jasmine was saying, her gaze finding Thomas and Laura in the crowd. "My mother, who has been my rock and my inspiration for as long as I can remember, and my father, who came into my life unexpectedly, but has become an integral part of this dream." Thomas felt a lump form in his throat as Jasmine continued. "They taught me that it's never too late to rebuild, to reconnect, to renew. And that's what we hope to offer all of you here at Roots and Renewal. Not just a meal, but a chance to slow down, to savor, to connect with each other and with the community that makes this food possible." As Jasmine concluded her speech to enthusiastic applause, Thomas found himself blinking back tears. He'd known his daughter was talented, but seeing her command the room with such grace and eloquence filled him with a pride he'd never experienced before. The evening progressed like a beautifully choreographed dance. Plates of exquisitely prepared food flowed from the kitchen, each one a work of art that told a story of local ingredients and innovative techniques. The dining room buzzed with excitement as guests sampled Jasmine's creations, exclaiming over unexpected flavor combinations and praising the attention to detail in every aspect of the meal. Thomas moved through the room, chatting with guests and basking in the glow of their enthusiastic responses. He overheard snippets of conversation that made his heart soar. "This is unlike anything I've tasted in Denver. The way they've incorporated local ingredients is just brilliant. You can really feel the love and care that's gone into every dish." As the main course was served, a perfectly roasted heritage breed pork with a maple apple glaze, accompanied by roasted root vegetables from a nearby farm, Thomas caught sight of one of the food critics in attendance. The man was taking small, deliberate bites, his expression one of intense concentration. Then, almost imperceptibly, his eyebrows raised, and a small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Thomas grinned to himself. He'd seen that look before in boardrooms and on construction sites. It was the look of someone who knew they were experiencing something special. As the evening wore on, Thomas found himself drawn back to the kitchen. He wanted to share the triumph of the night with Jasmine, to let her know how wonderfully everything was going. But as he approached the swinging doors, he paused. Through the small window, he could see Jasmine in her element. She moved with purpose and grace, tasting sauces, adjusting presentations, and guiding her team with firm but kind direction. Her face was flushed with exertion and excitement, a small smile playing on her lips as she worked. In that moment, Thomas realized that Jasmine didn't need his reassurance. She knew in her bones that she had created something magnificent. This was her moment, her triumph, and she was living it fully. Feeling a presence beside him, Thomas turned to find Laura. She too was watching Jasmine through the kitchen window, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "She's amazing, isn't she?" Laura said softly. Thomas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He reached out, taking Laura's hand in his own. She squeezed it gently, a gesture of shared pride and emotion. As the last desserts were served, a deconstructed apple pie that paid homage to the orchard Thomas had visited months ago, a palpable sense of satisfaction settled over the restaurant. Guests lingered over coffee and digestives, reluctant to leave the warm, inviting atmosphere. Finally, as the last guests departed with effusive praise and promises to return soon, the staff gathered for a final toast. Jasmine emerged from the kitchen, her chef's white splattered but her face glowing with triumph. "To roots and renewal," she said, raising a glass of champagne, "and to all of you who made this night possible." "We did it!" A cheer went up from the staff, and Thomas felt his heart swell with pride and love. As the celebration continued around him, he found a quiet moment to slip away, stepping outside for a breath of fresh air. The night was clear and crisp, the stars twinkling brightly above the Denver skyline. Thomas took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs. He thought back to the man he had been a year ago. Successful, yes, but lonely and unfulfilled in ways he hadn't even realized. Now standing here on the cusp of this new adventure, he felt more alive than he had in years. He had reconnected with his daughter, rebuilt a relationship with Laura, and discovered a whole new world of passion and purpose through Jasmine's culinary dreams. The sound of the door opening behind him broke Thomas from his reverie. He turned to see Jasmine step out, wrapped in a cardigan against the chill. "There you are," she said, moving to stand beside him. "I was wondering where you'd disappeared to." Thomas smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Just taking a moment to appreciate everything," he said. "Jasmine, I'm so incredibly proud of you. What you've accomplished here, it's beyond anything I could have imagined." Jasmine leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad," she said softly. "Your support, your belief in me, it means everything." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, gazing out at the city lights. Then Jasmine spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "You know, when I first found out about you, I was so angry. I thought about all the years we'd missed, all the moments you weren't there for." Thomas felt his heart clench, but before he could speak, Jasmine continued. "But now standing here, I realized something. Maybe it had to be this way. Maybe we both needed to grow, to become the people we are now, to truly appreciate this chance we've been given." Thomas felt tears prick at his eyes. He turned, pulling Jasmine into a proper hug. "Oh, sweetheart," he murmured. "I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for this second chance. You and your mother, You've given me so much more than I ever deserved." As they broke apart, the door opened once more, and Laura stepped out. "There you two are," she said, smiling warmly. "Everything's cleaned up inside. I think it's time we celebrated properly, don't you?" Thomas and Jasmine shared a look, then nodded in agreement. As they made their way back inside, Thomas felt a sense of completion he'd never experienced before. This, he realized, was what true success felt like. Not the financial gains or the business accolades, but the joy of family, the pride in his daughter's achievements, the warmth of reconnection with Laura. They settled at a corner table, Laura producing a bottle of champagne she'd been saving for just this moment. As they toasted to the success of Roots and Renewal and to the renewed bonds of their family, Thomas felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. The restaurant around them stood as a testament to their journey, a place where old wounds could heal, where new memories could be forged, and where the bonds of family, once broken, could be renewed stronger than ever. Like the very name suggested, they had rediscovered their roots and found renewal in the process. As the first light of dawn began to peek through the windows, Thomas, Laura and Jasmine sat together, sharing quiet laughter and heartfelt conversation. The challenges ahead, running a successful restaurant, navigating their new family dynamic, seemed less daunting in the warm afterglow of their triumph. Thomas looked at the two women who had become the center of his world and felt a peace he'd never known before. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, rooted in love and renewed by the power of second chances. As they finally prepared to leave, locking up the restaurant that represented so much more than just a business venture, Thomas paused in the doorway. He took one last look at the space that had transformed not just an old building, but their lives as well. "You know," he said softly, "I've built a lot of things in my life, skyscrapers, office complexes, entire neighborhoods, but this is by far the most important thing I've ever been a part of creating." Laura squeezed his hand gently. "It's because it's built on love," she said, "on family, on second chances." Jasmine nodded, her eyes shining. "On roots," she added, "and renewal." As they stepped out into the crisp morning air, the sun rising over the Denver skyline, Thomas felt a sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. The grand opening was just the beginning. There would be challenges, no doubt, but also joys and triumphs he couldn't even imagine yet. But whatever came their way, Thomas knew they would face it together, as a family, rooted in love and forever renewing their bonds. The story of Roots and Renewal, both the restaurant and their family, was just beginning, and Thomas Miller, once driven solely by ambition and the pursuit of success, couldn't wait to see where this new chapter would lead. As they walked to their cars, the early morning light casting long shadows behind them, Thomas felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected turn of events that had brought Jasmine into his life, for Laura's forgiveness and willingness to rebuild, for the second chance he'd been given to be a father, a partner, a better man. He thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the shock of discovering he had a daughter, the pain of confronting past mistakes, the joy of slowly building a relationship with Jasmine, the challenges and triumphs of bringing her dream to life. Each step, each obstacle overcome, had led them here, to this moment of shared triumph, of family bonds strengthened, of a future full of promise. As they reached their cars, they paused for one last group hug. Thomas held his daughter and the woman he'd never stopped loving close, breathing in the moment. "I love you both," he said softly, "more than I ever thought possible." "We love you too, Dad," Jasmine replied, her voice thick with emotion. Laura met his eyes over Jasmine's head, her gaze soft with an emotion Thomas dared not name just yet. But it was there, a promise of possibilities, of a future he'd thought long lost. As they finally parted ways, each heading home for some much-needed rest, Thomas felt a lightness in his heart he hadn't experienced in years. The road ahead would have its challenges, he knew. Running a successful restaurant was no easy task, and they were still navigating the complexities of their newfound family dynamic. But for perhaps the first time in his life, Thomas wasn't focused solely on the destination. He was learning to appreciate the journey, to find joy in the small moments, to prioritize the relationships that truly mattered. As he drove home through the quiet streets of early morning Denver, Thomas made a silent vow to himself. He would never again take his family for granted. He would continue to work hard, to strive for success, but not at the expense of the people he loved. He thought about the name of the restaurant, Roots and Renewal, and how perfectly it encapsulated their family. As Thomas drove home, the events of the night replayed in his mind. The triumphant opening of Roots and Renewal felt like more than just a business success. It was a pivotal moment in their family's journey of reconnection and growth. He thought about Jasmine's speech, the way she had commanded the room with grace and confidence. It reminded him of himself in his younger days, but with a warmth and empathy that he had often lacked in his pursuit of success. He realized, with a mixture of pride and humility, that Jasmine had inherited the best of both her parents, his drive and Laura's compassion. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon as Thomas pulled into his driveway. Despite the exhaustion that tugged at his limbs, he felt more alive than he had in years. He made his way inside, shedding his suit jacket and loosening his tie as he walked to the kitchen. As he brewed a cup of coffee, his gaze fell on a framed photo on the counter. It was a recent picture of him, Laura, and Jasmine, taken during one of their planning sessions for the restaurant. They were all laughing at something off camera, their faces alight with joy and shared purpose. Thomas picked up the frame, running his thumb over the image. A year ago, he would never have imagined having this. A family, a sense of belonging, a purpose beyond just accumulating wealth and accolades. The buzz of his phone interrupted his reverie. It was a text from Jasmine. "Can't sleep. Too excited. Brunch later to celebrate?" Thomas smiled, quickly typing back, "Absolutely. I'll call your mom. Get some rest, chef. You've earned it." As he sipped his coffee, Thomas's mind wandered to the future. The successful opening was just the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, maintaining the restaurant's quality and reputation, balancing family dynamics with business decisions, navigating the competitive Denver food scene. But for once, these challenges didn't fill him with stress or anxiety. Instead, he felt a sense of anticipation, even excitement. He thought about the way Jasmine's eyes had lit up as she described her vision for seasonal menu changes, about Laura's innovative ideas for community outreach programs through the restaurant. There was so much potential, not just for business success, but for making a real difference in people's lives. Thomas realized that his definition of success had fundamentally shifted. It was no longer about the bottom line or the next big deal. Success now meant seeing the pride in Jasmine's eyes as she created a dish that delighted her guests. It meant working alongside Laura, rebuilding the trust and connection they had once shared. It meant being part of something bigger than himself, something that brought joy and nourishment to others. As the morning wore on, Thomas found himself unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. His mind was too full of ideas and plans. He opened his laptop, beginning to jot down thoughts for future initiatives at Roots and Renewal. He envisioned cooking classes where Jasmine could share her skills and passion with others. He thought about partnering with local schools to provide healthy, chef-prepared lunches. He considered ways to expand their farm-to-table concept, perhaps even investing in a small farm where they could grow some of their own produce. Each idea built on the foundation they had created, a restaurant that was more than just a place to eat, but a hub for community, education, and sustainable practices. As he worked, Thomas felt a familiar surge of entrepreneurial energy, but it was tempered now by a new sense of purpose. Every decision, every plan was viewed through the lens of how it would impact his family, their staff, and the community they were building. Around mid-morning, his phone rang. It was Laura. "Hey," he answered, unable to keep the smile from his voice. "I was just about to call you about brunch." "Great minds think alike," Laura replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice too. "I thought we could try that new place on 7th Street. Jasmine's been wanting to check out their competition." "Sounds perfect," Thomas agreed. "Should we invite the head chef to join us or let her sleep in?" Laura chuckled. "Already tried. She's wide awake and recipe planning. Said she'll meet us there at 11. As they finalized their plans, Thomas felt a warmth spread through his chest. This easy banter with Laura, the shared pride in their daughter, it felt right in a way he had never expected to experience again. "Laura," he said before they hung up, "last night, it was amazing. Seeing Jasmine shine like that, watching her dream come to life. Thank you for raising her to be the incredible woman she is, for giving me this chance to be part of her life, part of both your lives." There was a pause on the other end of the line, filled with unspoken emotions. "Oh, Thomas, Laura finally said, her voice soft. "We're all getting a second chance here, and I'm grateful for it too." After they hung up, Thomas leaned back in his chair, a contemplative smile on his face. He thought about the long road that had led them here, the years of separation, the misunderstandings, the pain of missed opportunities, but also the joy of reconnection, the thrill of building something together, the deep satisfaction of family bonds renewed and strengthened. He thought about the name of their restaurant again, Roots and Renewal. It wasn't just a catchy phrase or a nod to their farm-to-table concept. It was the story of their family. They had rediscovered their roots, the fundamental connections that had never truly been severed, and in doing so, they had found renewal, a fresh start, a new chapter filled with possibilities. As Thomas prepared to leave for brunch, he paused in front of the mirror in his hallway. The man looking back at him was fundamentally the same as he had been a year ago. Same grey-streaked hair, same lines etched by years of high-stakes business deals. But there was something different in his eyes now, a softness, a warmth that had been missing for too long. He was still Thomas Miller, successful businessman and real estate mogul, but he was also a father, a partner, a man rediscovering the joys of family and purpose, beyond profit margins. As he stepped out into the bright Denver morning, Thomas felt a sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. The grand opening of Roots and Renewal wasn't an endpoint, it was a beginning. There would be challenges, no doubt. Running a restaurant was a notoriously difficult business, and balancing their new family dynamic would take work and patience. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Thomas wasn't solely focused on the destination. He was learning to appreciate the journey, to find joy in the small moments, to prioritize the relationships that truly mattered. He arrived at the restaurant a few minutes early, parking his car and taking a moment to observe the bustling street. It was a beautiful day, the kind of crisp autumn morning that made Denver shine. He watched as people hurried past, some undoubtedly making their way to brunch dates of their own. Thomas found himself wondering about their stories. Were there other families out there, he mused, going through their own journeys of reconnection and renewal? Other parents and children finding their way back to each other, other relationships being rebuilt on foundations of forgiveness and second chances. The thought filled him with a sense of connection to the broader human experience. Their story, his, Laura's and Jasmine's, wasn't just about them. It was a testament to the resilience of the human heart, to the power of love and forgiveness, to bridge even the widest gaps. He was pulled from his reflections by the sight of Jasmine walking up the street, her face bright, despite the clear signs of a sleepless night. She waved when she saw him, quickening her pace. "Dad," she called as she approached. "Have you been waiting long?" Thomas shook his head, pulling her into a warm hug. "Just got here. Your mum's on her way." As they waited for Laura, Jasmine bubbled over with excitement, sharing her ideas for new menu items and special events at the restaurant. Thomas listened with rapt attention, marveling at her creativity and passion. When Laura arrived a few minutes later, they made their way into the restaurant. As they were seated and began to peruse the menus, Thomas couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. How many business meetings had he conducted over meals like this? How many deals had been struck, contracts negotiated, over plates of expertly prepared food? But this was different. This wasn't about business. Not really. It was about family, about celebration, about savoring not just the food but the moment, the company, the sheer joy of being together. As they placed their orders, Jasmine peppering the waiter with questions about preparation methods and ingredient sourcing, Thomas sat back and simply observed. He watched the easy banter between Laura and Jasmine, the way they unconsciously mirrored each other's gestures. He noted the sparkle in Laura's eyes as she listened to their daughter's enthusiastic plans for the future, and he felt, with a certainty that warmed him to his core, that this was where he belonged. This was what he had been working towards all along, even if he hadn't realized it. Not the accolades or the financial success, but this, a family, whole and healing, facing the future together. As their food arrived and they began to eat, the conversation flowed easily. They reminisced about the highlights of the opening night, laughed over small mishaps that had gone unnoticed by the guests, and dreamed about what the future might hold. "You know," Laura said at one point, her voice thoughtful, "last night watching you in the kitchen, Jasmine, it reminded me so much of your grandmother." Jasmine's eyes widened. "Really? I didn't know Grandma was a cook." Laura nodded. a wistful smile playing on her lips. Oh yes, she wasn't a professional chef or anything, but she had that same passion, that same ability to bring people together through food. I think she would have been so proud to see you last night. Thomas felt a pang of regret, thinking of all the family history Jasmine had missed out on because of his absence. But then he reminded as the seasons changed and Roots and Renewal established itself as a beloved fixture in Denver's culinary scene, Thomas, Laura and Jasmine found themselves settling into a new rhythm of life. The frenetic energy of the restaurant's opening months had given way to a steady, purposeful routine that allowed them time to reflect on the remarkable journey that had brought them to this point. One crisp autumn evening, nearly a year after the grand opening, the three of them sat in the restaurant's cozy back office, surrounded by the day's receipts and next week's menu plans. The familiar scents of herbs and spices wafted in from the kitchen where the night's service was winding down. Thomas leaned back in his chair, a contented smile playing on his lips as he watched Jasmine and Laura poring over a new recipe idea. The sight of them working together so seamlessly, their heads bent close in concentration, filled him with a warmth that had become wonderfully familiar over the past year. You know, he said, breaking the comfortable silence, I can't help but think about where we all were this time last year. How much has changed? Jasmine looked up, her eyes bright with understanding. I was just thinking the same thing, she admitted. It's kind of hard to believe, isn't it, that we've come so far? Laura nodded, reaching out to squeeze Jasmine's hand. It's been quite a journey, she agreed, her voice soft with emotion. As they sat there, the day's work done and the night stretching out before them, they found themselves reflecting on the emotional odyssey that had brought them to this moment. For Thomas, the past year had been a profound lesson in humility and growth. He thought back to the man he had been before, driven, successful, but ultimately unfulfilled. The shock of discovering he had a daughter had shaken him to his core, forcing him to confront the choices he'd made and the priorities he'd set. I never realized how empty my life was, he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. All those years chasing success, thinking that the next big deal would finally make me happy. But it was all just hollow. Jasmine reached out, placing her hand on his arm. But Dad, look at everything you've accomplished. The buildings you've created, the jobs you've provided. That's not nothing. Thomas smiled at his daughter, marveling at her ability to see the best in people, even him. You're right, sweetheart, and I'm proud of those things. But this, he gestured around them, encompassing not just the restaurant, but the three of them together. This is what really matters. Family, connection, purpose beyond just making money. Laura nodded, her eyes meeting Thomas's with a warmth that made his heart skip a beat. You've changed so much, Thomas, she said softly. The way you've thrown yourself into this restaurant, into being a father to Jasmine, it's been amazing to watch. For Laura, the journey had been one of forgiveness and rediscovery. She thought back to the anger and hurt she'd carried for so many years, the walls she'd built around her heart. I was so afraid, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Afraid of being hurt again, afraid of disrupting the life Jasmine and I had built. When you came back into our lives, Thomas, part of me wanted to shut you out completely. Thomas reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I wouldn't have blamed you if you had, he said. I know I hurt you, Laura. Both of you. Laura squeezed his hand, shaking her head. But that's just it. Letting you in, giving you a chance to be part of Jasmine's life and mine. It's been healing in ways I never expected. Watching you two together, seeing the bond you formed, it's helped me let go of so much old pain. Jasmine listened to her parents, her heart full of love and gratitude. Her own journey had been one of identity and belonging. She thought back to the confusion and anger she'd felt upon first learning about Thomas, the way her world had seemed to tilt on its axis. I used to think I knew exactly who I was, she said, her voice thoughtful. Jasmine Carter, aspiring chef, daughter of Laura. And then, suddenly, there was this whole other part of me I didn't know about. It was overwhelming. Thomas and Laura exchanged a glance, both remembering the tumultuous early days of their reunion. But now, Jasmine continued, a smile spreading across her face, I feel like I understand myself better than ever. I'm still me, still the person Mom raised me to be. But I'm also your daughter, Dad, and somehow that makes me feel more complete. The impact of Roots and Renewal on their lives went far beyond just professional success. For Thomas, it had provided a new sense of purpose, a way to use his business acumen for something that truly mattered to him. He found himself approaching each day with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt in years, eager to tackle new challenges and explore innovative ideas for the restaurant. "I never thought I'd be this excited about farm-to-table sourcing or menu planning," he chuckled. "But seeing how it all comes together, how it impacts not just our customers, but our staff and suppliers too, it's incredible." Laura nodded in agreement. The restaurant had reignited her own passion for community building and education. She had spearheaded several initiatives, including cooking classes for underprivileged youth and a program that provided meals to local shelters. "It's like we're nurturing more than just a business," she mused. "We're nurturing connections, fostering community. It's everything I ever wanted to do as a teacher, but on a whole new level." For Jasmine, roots and renewal was the realization of a lifelong dream, but it had also become so much more. It was a place where she could express her creativity, push her culinary boundaries, and make a tangible difference in people's lives through food. "Every time I see a customer's face light up when they taste a new dish, or when I hear our staff talking about how much they love working here, it just fills me with joy," she said, her eyes shining. "And knowing that I'm building this with both of you, that it's a true family endeavor, it makes it all so much more meaningful." As they continued to reflect, they found themselves addressing some of the emotional conflicts that had lingered beneath the surface. Thomas, emboldened by the openness of the moment, decided to broach a subject that had been weighing on his mind. "Laura," he began, his voice hesitant, "I know we've come a long way this past year, but I can't help feeling like there's still so much left unsaid between us. About the past, about what happened when I left." Laura was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You're right," she said finally. "We've been so focused on moving forward, on making things work for Jasmine's sake, that we haven't really dealt with our own history." Jasmine started to stand, sensing that her parents might need some privacy, but Laura gently pulled her back down. "No, sweetheart, you're part of this too. Our past shaped your life as much as ours." And so, there in the quiet of the restaurant office, they began to unravel the tangled threads of their shared history. Thomas spoke of his regret for letting his ambition overshadow his love for Laura, of the loneliness that had plagued him even as he achieved professional success. Laura shared her hurt and anger at being left behind, the struggle of raising Jasmine alone while always wondering, what if? Jasmine listened, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes with laughter as her parents recounted the story of their young love, their painful separation, and the long, winding road that had led them back to each other. As the night wore on, a sense of catharsis filled the room. Old wounds long left to fester were finally exposed to the light, examined, and begin to heal. There were moments of tension, of course. Old hurts don't disappear overnight, but there was also forgiveness, understanding, and a renewed appreciation for the bonds that connected them. "I can't change the past," Thomas said at one point, his voice thick with emotion. "But I promise you both I will spend every day trying to make up for lost time, to be the father and the friend that you both deserve." Laura reached out, taking his hand in hers. "We can't erase the past, Thomas. But maybe we don't need to. All those experiences, good and bad, they've shaped us into who we are now. And who we are now, well, I think we're pretty great." Jasmine nodded emphatically, wrapping her arms around both her parents. "We are great," she agreed. "We're family." As the first light of dawn began to peek through the office windows, the three of them sat back, emotionally exhausted but feeling lighter than they had in years. The air between them felt clearer somehow, as if the last vestiges of old resentments and unspoken hurts had finally dissipated. In the days and weeks that followed, they found their family bonds growing even stronger. The open communication that had begun that night continued, with all three of them making a conscious effort to share their thoughts and feelings more freely. Thomas, in particular, found himself opening up in ways he never had before. He shared stories of his own childhood with Jasmine, filling in the gaps of her family history. He spoke of his own father's high expectations, of the drive to succeed that had been instilled in him from a young age. "I think, in some ways, I was trying to prove something," he admitted one evening as they closed up the restaurant together. "To my father, to the world, to myself. But in doing so, I lost sight of what really mattered." Jasmine listened intently, beginning to understand the forces that had shaped her father long before she came into the picture. "But you've changed that now, Dad," she said softly. "You're building something that matters, something that brings people together." Laura too found herself sharing more of her own journey. She spoke of the challenges of single motherhood, of the times she doubted herself, of the fierce love for Jasmine that had given her strength even in the darkest moments. "There were times I was so angry with you, Thomas," she confessed one quiet afternoon as they worked side by side in the restaurant's office. "But there were also times I missed you so much it hurt. Watching Jasmine grow, seeing little pieces of you in her, it was both a joy and a constant reminder of what we'd lost." Thomas listened, his heart aching for the pain he'd caused, but also swelling with admiration for the strong, resilient woman Laura had become. "I'm so sorry, Laura," he said, reaching out to take her hand, "and I'm so grateful that you've given me this chance to make things right." As they worked through these emotional revelations, they found a new dynamic emerging in their family unit. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were still disagreements, moments of frustration, times when old habits threatened to resurface. But underlying it all was a bedrock of love, respect, and commitment to making their unconventional family work. Jasmine, in particular, blossomed in this new environment. The security of having both her parents in her life, supporting her dreams and working alongside her, gave her a confidence that spilled over into every aspect of her life. Her culinary creations became even more innovative, her management of the restaurant more assured. "I never realized how much I needed this," she confided in Laura one evening as they experimented with a new dessert recipe. "Having you both here, being able to learn from you in different ways, it's like I'm finally cooking with all the ingredients, you know?" Laura smiled, understanding the metaphor perfectly. "And the result is something beautiful," she said, pulling her daughter into a hug. As the months passed, Roots and Renewal continued to thrive, becoming not just a successful restaurant, but a true community hub. Regular customers became like extended family. Staff members flourished in the warm, supportive environment, and the restaurant's commitment to local sourcing and sustainability made it a model for responsible business practices in Denver. But more than its public success, it was the private moments that truly cemented the new family dynamic. The quiet mornings when Thomas would arrive early to find Jasmine already in the kitchen, experimenting with new recipes, and they'd share a cup of coffee and easy conversation before the day began. The late nights when Laura would bring them both tea as they pored over the books, gently reminding them to rest. The family dinners in the closed restaurant, where they'd try out new dishes and share the highs and lows of their days. It was during one such dinner, about 18 months after the restaurant's opening, that Thomas cleared his throat nervously, drawing the attention of both Laura and Jasmine. I've been doing some thinking," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "About the future. Our future." Laura and Jasmine exchanged a glance, sensing the importance of the moment. "This past year and a half, it's been the happiest of my life," Thomas continued. "Being here with both of you, building this restaurant, rebuilding our family, it's made me realize what I truly want." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Laura's eyes widened as he opened it, revealing a beautiful, understated ring. "Laura," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, "I know we can't erase the past, and maybe we shouldn't want to. It's made us who we are. But if you're willing, I'd like to start writing a new chapter. Together. Properly this time." Jasmine gasped softly, her hands flying to her mouth as she looked between her parents. Laura was silent for a long moment, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. "Oh, Thomas," she breathed. Yes, I'd like that very much." As Thomas slipped the ring onto Laura's finger, his hands shaking slightly, Jasmine let out a joyful whoop, rushing to embrace both her parents. "Does this mean—" she began, her voice trembling with excitement. Thomas nodded, wrapping an arm around each of them. "It means we're officially becoming the family we've always been in our hearts," he said. As they stood there, holding each other close in the warm, fragrant air of the restaurant that had brought them back together, all three felt a sense of rightness, of completion. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been pain, misunderstandings, years of separation. But here, in this moment, it all seemed worth it. They had rediscovered their roots, in family and love, in the simple joy of creating something meaningful together. And in that rediscovery, they had found renewal, a fresh start, a new chapter filled with promise and possibility. As they began to excitedly discuss wedding plans and future dreams, the restaurant around them stood as a testament to their journey, a place where old wounds had healed, where new memories had been forged, and where the bonds of family once broken had been renewed stronger than ever. Like the very name suggested, they had found their roots and their renewal, and together they looked forward to cultivating a future as rich and nourishing as the meals they created, as warm and inviting as the home they had built within these walls. The story of roots and renewal, both the restaurant and their family, was far from over. But now they would write each new chapter together, rooted in love and constantly renewing their commitment to each other and the life they were building. As the night deepened around them, Thomas, Laura, and Jasmine remained in their embrace. Savoring the moment and the promise of all that was to come, they had found their way back to each other, had built something beautiful from the ashes of the past, and in doing so, they had discovered that sometimes the most powerful renewals come from the deepest roots of all, those of family, love, and the courage to begin again. 5 years later, the warm glow of the setting sun filtered through the large windows of Roots and Renewal, casting a golden light across the bustling restaurant. At a corner table, Thomas Miller sat with his wife Laura, watching their daughter Jasmine expertly navigate the dinner rush. The sight never failed to fill him with pride and a profound sense of gratitude. "Can you believe it's been 5 years?" Laura mused, her hand finding Thomas's on the table. Thomas shook his head, a smile playing on his lips. "Sometimes it feels like just yesterday we were frantically preparing for opening night. Other times, it feels like we've been doing this our whole lives," Laura finished, understanding in her eyes. In the years since its opening, Roots and Renewal had become more than just a successful restaurant. It had grown into a beloved Denver institution, known not just for its innovative farm-to-table cuisine, but for its commitment to community and sustainability. Under Jasmine's creative direction, the menu continued to evolve and surprise, each season bringing new delights that showcased the best of Colorado's local produce. But it was more than just the food that kept people coming back. There was a warmth to the place, a sense of belonging that made every customer feel like part of the family. Thomas and Laura had married in a small, intimate ceremony in the restaurant itself, surrounded by their closest friends, loyal staff, and the community that had embraced them. Jasmine had been their maid of honor, her joy radiating throughout the entire celebration. As they sat now, watching the life they had built together unfold around them, Thomas felt a familiar wave of emotion wash over him. "You know," he said, his voice low and intimate, "there are still moments when I can hardly believe this is real, that I got this second chance." Laura squeezed his hand, her eyes soft with understanding. "We all got a second chance, Thomas, and look what we've done with it." Indeed, the impact of their renewed family bonds and the success of Roots and Renewal had rippled out far beyond just their personal lives. The restaurant had become a model for sustainable business practices in Denver, inspiring other establishments to adopt similar farm-to-table approaches and community-focused initiatives. Jasmine's cooking classes for underprivileged youth had blossomed into a full-fledged culinary education program, providing opportunities for aspiring chefs who might not otherwise have had access to professional training. Several of her former students now worked in the Roots and Renewal kitchen, their success stories a testament to the power of mentorship and community support. Thomas had leveraged his business acumen and connections to establish a foundation that provided microloans to small local farms, helping to strengthen the very supply chain that made their restaurant's philosophy possible. Laura, drawing on her background in education, had developed a curriculum around sustainable food practices that was now being implemented in schools across Colorado. As they reminisced about the journey that had brought them to this point, Jasmine approached their table, a new dish in hand. "Hey, you two," she greeted, setting the plate down. "What do you think of this for the fall menu?" Thomas and Laura leaned in, inhaling the aromatic steam rising from the beautifully plated meal. It was a perfect encapsulation of Jasmine's culinary style, innovative yet comforting, a blend of familiar flavors with unexpected twists. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Laura said, her eyes shining with pride. Thomas nodded in agreement, already reaching for his fork. "Let's give it a try, shall we?" As they savored the dish, exchanging thoughts and suggestions, Thomas was struck by the easy flow of their interaction. The way Jasmine's face lit up at their feedback, the gentle teasing between mother and daughter, the shared language of food and family that had become the cornerstone of their relationship. Later that evening, after the last customer had left and the kitchen had been cleaned, the three of them sat at the bar, sharing a bottle of wine and reflecting on the day. It had become something of a tradition, these quiet moments after closing, a time to connect and recharge. "I was thinking," Jasmine began, swirling the wine in her glass, "about maybe opening a second location. Not right away, but someday. What do you think?" Thomas and Laura exchanged a glance, a whole conversation passing between them in an instant. "I think," Thomas said carefully, "that if anyone can make it work, it's you, sweetheart. But remember, there's no rush. What we've built here is special. Make sure you're ready before you try to replicate it." Jasmine nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I know, and that's why I'm glad I have you both to talk to about these things. Your support, it means everything to me." Laura reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind Jasmine's ear in a gesture of maternal affection. "We'll always be here for you, honey, whatever you decide to do." As the conversation flowed, touching on plans for the future and memories of the past, Thomas found himself marveling at the strength of the bonds they had forged. 5 years ago, he had been a stranger to his own daughter, a man defined by his business success, but emotionally adrift. Now he was part of something so much richer, so much more fulfilling than he could have ever imagined. The name Roots and Renewal had taken on new layers of meaning over the years. It spoke not just to their commitment to local, sustainable food, but to the very foundation of their family. They had rediscovered their roots, healing old wounds and forging new connections. And in doing so, they had found renewal in their relationships, in their purpose, in their understanding of what truly mattered in life. As the night deepened and the city quieted outside, Thomas raised his glass. "To second chances," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and to the family we've become." "To roots," Laura added, her eyes shining as she clinked her glass against his. "And renewal," Jasmine finished, completing the toast. The three of them sat there, bathed in the warm glow of the restaurant lights, their faces reflecting the joy and contentment of a family that had found its way home. Outside, Denver slept, but within the walls of Roots and Renewal, the promise of new beginnings, of love rekindled and bonds strengthened, burned as bright as ever. Thomas knew that challenges would come. Running a restaurant was never easy, and family dynamics would always have their complexities. But as he looked at the two women who had become the center of his world, he felt a profound sense of peace. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, rooted in love and constantly renewing their commitment to each other and the life they had built. As they finally prepared to leave, locking up the restaurant that had become the heart of their family's story, Thomas paused in the doorway. He took one last look at the space that had transformed not just an old building, but their lives as well. "You know," he said softly, "I've built a lot of things in my life, but this is by far the most important." Laura squeezed his hand gently. "Because it's built on love," she said, "on family, on second chances." Jasmine nodded, her eyes shining. "On roots," she added, "and renewal." As they stepped out into the cool night air, the Denver skyline twinkling before them, Thomas felt a sense of anticipation for what lay ahead. The story of Roots and Renewal, both the restaurant and their family, was far from over. There would be new challenges, new triumphs, new opportunities for growth and connection, but whatever came their way, Thomas knew they would face it, as they had faced everything else since that fateful day 5 years ago. Together, as a family, rooted in love and forever renewing their bonds, and in that knowledge, in the warmth of his daughter's smile and the gentle pressure of his wife's hand in his, Thomas Miller found a happiness deeper and more fulfilling than he had ever known. It was a happiness built on second chances, on the courage to begin again, and on the enduring power of family to heal, to grow, and to flourish against all odds. If this story touched your heart and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well. So click on it now and we'll see you there.